the biggest part of a Suzuki course is the philosophy and developing humans through the difficult work of learning abilities to play an instrument.
I first met Kate Jones this past summer at the International Society of Basses Convention in Ithaca, New York. We were in downtown Ithaca. I was meeting up a couple of people that had listened to the podcast previously, and I sat down at a table with Kate. We started talking. One thing led to another. I mentioned that I was coming down to Dallas. She set me up with doing a clinic for some of her students, and it has been so much fun getting to know Kate these last few months. During ISB, Kate actually introduced me to Curtis Burris, longtime Philadelphia Orchestra and National Symphony bassist, teaches at the Chautauqua Institution, and Kate had studied with Curtis. So when I interviewed Curtis Burris, Kate was actually in the room, and it was so cool to do that there at ISB and then be able to follow up with Kate. And Kate is a Suzuki bass master. I don't know if she wants me to use that term, but she is rocking it on the bass, teaching the bass down in the Dallas area at Hurst-Euless-Bedford Independent School District. I think I got that pronounced correctly. I went to her school and was just blown away by what's going on down there in the Dallas area and what Kate has built. She's got all these great students, enthusiastic students, set up so well, playing great music. It's so inspiring. And it was so much fun for me to sit down and check out these 16th and 32nd size basses. There's a great photo that I'll link to for this episode of me playing a 32nd size bass. It looks like I'm trying to play a viola or something. And it was so cool to explore this world, which is a world that's fairly foreign to me. Suzuki bass teaching and teaching the very young students. My wife is a Suzuki harp certified, former harp teacher, now radiologist. So I know that world a little bit through her, but I've chatted with Virginia Dixon, who's obviously worked in the Suzuki world for years and years and who Kate's worked with. But it's so much fun to sit down and ask Kate, what the heck is Suzuki bass? How do you approach it? How do you motivate these young kids? How do you approach a lesson? How do you set up parents for success with the students? We dig into this and so many other concepts. And what a cool job. Kate's so happy to be there. She's got great administrators, great school staff. And it's just so cool to chat with her. I really hope you enjoy this conversation with Kate Jones. So you started with Judy Hanna at Illinois Wesleyan?
I did.
Wow.
For 4 years. And actually, I started as a pre-med student.
You started as pre-med?
Yeah, like biology major or something.
At Wesleyan?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And obviously, it wasn't for me. And Judy was so nurturing with my musical soul and just... I mean, our lessons were like Tai Chi and bass playing and musicality and just kind of invited me into the bass world.
Well, I know Judy really well.
Yeah.
In 1994, 95, somewhere around there, she went back to school to do a master's at Northwestern. And that was my freshman year at Northwestern.
Oh, wow.
And we were in the orchestra together, and we were stand partners.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that crazy?
That's crazy.
And then we've known each other for years and played gigs together. And so that's but I've been a Judy fan for a long time.
She was really great for me because when I needed, all undergrad students have their journey. And when I needed her guidance, she would give it to me, but she also gave me a lot of independence.
Right.
And nurtured my confidence as a musician because coming from a big musical family, I was, and still really am, I would say I would be considered the underdog of in my family.
In the family?
Yeah.
Okay.
My parents we're both musicians, and my mom was she was a master teacher in Illinois, a public school teacher, and then all my siblings are also musicians. Ben was in Chanticleer, and Lindsay has a degree in piano and violin, and my younger brother is a very accomplished jazz trumpet player and vocalist. So
it's like music was predestined.
Yeah, it was like a tornado of music in our house at all times.
But then pre-med, which I find fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I liked math, and I was around people who, well, in our family, we were encouraged to get real jobs.
Okay, I understand.
And to my parents' dismay, we all became musicians. So, and actually they're incredibly supportive. There's no way that I would be anywhere near who I am today without them. So I say that in jest, but I mean, they, are always very clear about how proud they are of all of us, and have, just really, it was a Suzuki family, really.
Yeah, and so that was just super fascinating. So your parents both went to Illinois. We were just talking about this, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So my father, they met in Indiana. He was the concertmaster of Fort Wayne Philharmonic and taught at Indiana Purdue. And then that's where my parents met. She was his violin student, actually. And then, much later, they played in an orchestra in Canada together, and eventually made it to Chicago and knew Bob Bine and played music with him, chamber music regularly. And he dared my father to go to law school. It's very serendipitous, and that's a normal thing in our family.
Well, and she had contact with Paul Roland,
yes,
too, while at University of Illinois, which is like one of those if people don't know, it's like one of those legendary teachers in the string world. Mm-hmm. And my Havas Roland Suzuki book that I had from my undergrad and would read about it. And so she had experience with him.
Yeah, and a lot of colleges now have the string project.
Yeah.
And that was something that came out of the Roland movement, and a lot of his teaching has to do with natural motion. So the way he teaches spiccato, for example, is mimicking how your arm moves when you're bouncing a basketball. And everything was always circles, kind of like Casals always talked about circles, too. I mean, it's all just, here's how your arm really moves, and let's try to make the violin work ergonomically. That's how she describes it anyway.
Before we go on, I'd like to give a shout out to the folks that help us keep the lights on here at Contrabass Conversations with our small, plucky organization, A440 Violin Shop in Chicago, Illinois, right by Wrigley Field, is a place that I've sent students to for years. I've taken my bass there for years, and they are a great place for repairs, for new instruments, for bows, for strings, you name it. If you're looking to sell a bass, you can sell it on consignment there at A440. They're a big supporter of the bass community. I see them at the Chicago Bass Festival. I see them at ISB. I love what they do, and I'm so thrilled to be able to chat about them for the podcast because I'm a fan. I've used them for years. People say, where do you go in Chicago? I say, go to A440. Then go check out a ball game down the street if it's happening. A440violinshop.com. And thank you to the Bass Violin Shop down in North Carolina, the Southeast's largest inventory of basses, and they offer professional setups, they offer repairs, and they offer restorations at reasonable prices. So they specialize in resetting necks, repairing cracks, installing new fingerboards, new bass bars, custom C extensions, whatever you're looking for. The Bass Violin Shop will work hard to get the most out of your instrument without blowing your budget. You can find them at bassviolinshop.com. All right, back to our conversation with Kate.
And I love those. I've seen a lot of those clips of Paul Roland's classes and all that. Yeah, fascinating.
And that those actions of teaching of actions and string playing videos are really fascinating too. she said it was really neat because he was always using, contemporary composers, which is something that we lack in a lot of our other literature for early string playing, is more complicated harmonies because of our heavy use of folk tunes, which also helps children. But Paul Roland was incredibly interested in getting that early exposure to those really fun harmonies.
Yeah.
So that was great for her. And then eventually they moved, I guess, to Central Illinois, and she was recruited by a local Suzuki teacher, and that's how she got started in the Suzuki world.
Well, and so now, and Kate has spent time doing masters in Cleveland, and then went to UNT as a doctorate. But I'd love to dive in, like, since we're talking about Suzuki, like what you're doing now. Like, we're sitting here in your classroom. I was just playing your 32nd size bass,
yes,
and the 16th size bass. So, what is your? Which I think it's super cool that this job exists. Like, what is your job that you're doing right now in the school system?
Actually, it's a unicorn job. It's amazing. I teach all 4 string instruments in the Suzuki style, which means that parents come to the lessons and the children are learning by rote, and we're, creating a very nurturing environment for learning music in a language acquisition sort of method. And the school district hired me specifically to grow the bass program. So part of my job is outreach district-wide and doing district bass classes. And part of my job is training our teachers to teach the bass players that they have at their schools. And so it's been really fascinating because I've had a chance to really solidify my thoughts about the available literature and how I start bass players. I've become incredibly opinionated, some people would say, about certain things having to do with very early young bass teaching. And I've had a chance to work with the other Suzuki teachers on my team. There's 11 of us, and it's a hive mind. So in addition to all the great training that I've been exposed to, thankfully, these 11 people are so smart and so generous with their ideas. And so I've been able to find ways to make what works so well in the violin world adaptable for bass. And it's just been a really incredible experience. I can't believe this exists.
Well, and it doesn't exist a lot of places, right?
Right.
So how does a DMA double bass student find themselves teaching Suzuki strings in the public schools? How did that all play out? And feel free to go back to Cleveland and those experiences.
Well, it did actually start in Cleveland. I was studying with Max and Jeff, and I was practicing really hard because I was an underdog there too and wanted to get better. And part of my work study at Cleveland was helping the prep orchestra program with their bass players. And so I would show up on Saturday mornings and tune those little basses and then stand behind the kids with my bass and play their orchestra parts with them. And Tracy Rowell is the Suzuki bass teacher for the Sato program at Cleveland Institute of Music. It's a really big Suzuki program. And she was going on maternity leave my first year at Cleveland, and somehow my name was brought up as somebody who could possibly step in and be a substitute. And one thing led to another, and I found myself observing her lessons long enough to realize that not only was she an expert and a talented teacher, and her kids were all impeccably set up, and it was incredible, but I had no idea what I was getting myself into, and all of a sudden it's time for me to start teaching, and I have jumped in, head first from 0 students to all of a sudden close to 20 beautifully set up young musicians, and I was just hoping that I could keep them going until Tracy came back.
Well, and you like teaching was not like a huge interest of yours, even though you have the teachers in the background, right? That wasn't really something that you were focusing on at that point.
At the time, I thought I didn't like kids.
Yeah.
But looking back, I realized that I just hadn't been around kids for such a long time, because at that point I've been in college for 5 years, and you're just not around kids. There are no children on a college campus, really. And so I didn't know that interacting with them was fun and that their brains were really interesting. So I was pretty nervous, and I thought that I was going to... I think I called my mother and told her something like, I'm going to mess all of Tracy's students up and they're all going to quit. And she had to reassure me, so... but it was a really fun semester, and it was great. And then that same summer, I took my first Suzuki course, and again, went in a little bit reluctantly. I wasn't sure whether it was going to be for me, and by the end of the first hour, Virginia Dixon had me wrapped around her little finger, so it was a little bit serendipitous.
What do you do in a Suzuki? My wife got Suzuki certified. I went through several book trainings for harp. Mm-hmm. So I went to Salt Lake City, I think, is where that happens for harp. Like, what happens in a Suzuki training program?
Well, book 1 is a longer course, mm-hmm. because everything that happens before you start playing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, which is the first piece in Suzuki Book 1, that's all considered a whole week of study if you're doing a short-term training. So really they consider Book 1 like 2 courses, and they used to split it up into 2 courses, but now it's one big course, and it's something like, and I wish I had the precise numbers in front of me, but it's approximately 30 hours of coursework where you're working with the group of would-be Suzuki bass teachers under the mentorship of, at the time it was Virginia, and she still teaches these classes. That she was my teacher trainer, and Dan Swaim also does this. And you work on, here's how you set up a young bass player. These are the things that you do to develop certain skills, and here are some games that work with certain ages, and some parts of it are talking about, working with the whole family and training parents to be the home teacher, and other parts deal with child development and how your brain works when you're 5 versus how it works when you're 2. 2-year-olds have to lick everything.
Yeah, right.
So that's how they process the world. They've got to taste it. But if a 5-year-old's doing that, might just have ice cream on it.
Right, yeah.
But so that's kind of what the first book is about. But then you also have to get into all the songs that are actually in it. So each piece has certain teaching points. For example, Lightly Row has string crossings, and if you leave your first finger on the top string, you can make like a tunnel with your fingers, and you're building that hand frame. Or if you prefer to teach the other way, where you kind of move your weight over to the string you're playing on, that would be your teaching point. A lot of it is personal to the expert teacher and their own technique. But the biggest part of a Suzuki course is the philosophy and developing humans through the difficult work of learning abilities to play an instrument. And at 5 years old, making a beautiful tone is a big journey. And so developing the strength of character to take a lesson and be patient with yourself and your home teacher and play the instrument becomes a part of your own confidence and self-worth and ability to do difficult things in life.
So I was working with some of Kate's students yesterday, and one thing that just bringing up some of the setup and that sort of thing. One thing that I was struck was just like these like magnificent bow hands, all the way down to bow arms. And I think about the students I've started and how non-magnificent so much of it is, and my lack of Suzuki training could certainly be a factor. But like, what am I doing? What's going wrong with me, Kate? Like, what can I be doing to help these? How are you setting these people up for success? Just in terms of that, maybe. I mean, there's so many other things, but like in terms of the bow, hand, bow, arm, what are you doing?
Well, I've been incredibly inspired by my coworkers and had a lot of tips and tricks, but I have had a recent obsession with the bow hold, and I will say that my beginners now have quite a journey with the bow hold to earn their instrument. And so they have to do, and I sound really mean, but this was something that I've borrowed from a close friend and one of my teacher trainers. I took cello training with Alison O'Neill in Cincinnati, and she has her students do 500 bow holds to earn their cello, and then 500 more to earn their bow. And I tried it last year, and I've got to tell you, it works. Because they have such an ownership of their instrument by the time they've done this. And while your first bow hold may take 30 seconds, your 1,000th bow hold takes 1. And it's beautiful. Hopefully. But my advanced students, I mean, I would say that with the bow hold or with anything, I have a one-track mind in a lesson, and it's very rooted in Dr. Suzuki's philosophy, and he called it the one-point lesson. So there might be like chaos going on with this bass student in front of me, and it just might be notes flying everywhere, and bow holds are backwards, and the shoes are on the wrong feet, and he's playing the totally wrong finger in the wrong position on the wrong string. But I have to pick something to start with. And so I'll try to pick the thing that we can go with first, and if that's easy enough, then we can move on. But you have to, and that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but you have to pick something and just focus on that.
A one-point lesson.
And
I love that.
It might take months. I have one friend who is in high school. I call my students my friends sometimes. My high school student, I won't say his name, so I won't embarrass him, but now we have just shortened it to doorknob because his bow hold gets so backloaded that he puts like the outside of his pinky on the bow stick while he's playing.
Oh, everybody listening is like, I have a student that does that. Like,
so all I have to do is turn my arm like I'm turning a doorknob, and in technical terms that's a pronation.
Yeah.
And I don't need him to go all the way over, but just showing him to do that or saying the word doorknob, he'll flip it, and he can even do it while he's playing now. So it's in there, but we're still only doing that until we're done with that. And then later we'll work on something else. So
I like the idea of the one-point lesson. That's fantastic. What are some other things, like I was not Suzuki trained, a lot of bass players weren't, more and more are now these days, but like, what are some other differences between what you would, and Suzuki lesson is kind of a wide term, I know, but like what are some of the other differences one might see between like what you think of as a Suzuki lesson and a non-Suzuki lesson?
Well, I think that one of the things that Dr. Suzuki really emphasized was the mother tongue approach, is what he called it. And some people think of it as a rote method approach, but really the expectation is that the child is immersed in the music they're learning. And so while you're going through all of what we would call the pre-twinkle phase, which is all that beginning setup stuff, they've already started listening to the entire Book 1 CD. So that by the time they get to the most difficult song, or the last song in the book, they've been listening to it the whole time they've learned all the other songs, and it's a part of them. And so it develops your memorization skills, and they're able to play the instrument without reading it on a page, without reading the music on the page. That's not to say that we don't teach music literacy and note reading, but it's done separately so that you can develop your technique with the student, and you can work on things like posture and tone and intonation and set up things without also having that visual distraction of how disorienting the notes on the page look. Because, a Book 1 student or a Book 2 student should be able to figure out the notes and discern the articulations from the recording and play it on their instrument. And, eventually their reading does catch up to their technical ability. But the musicianship is developed, kind of with the master performer model in that beautiful recording. So, having Gary Carr play on the Suzuki CD and having Francois Rabat play on the George Vance CD, I mean, that's what it's about, is these 5-year-olds are listening to a master bass player from the very beginning, and they're hearing the most beautiful lightly row possible, so that they develop that sense of sound.
Sound from the beginning.
Yes, tone.
Yeah.
Dr. Suzuki always said, beautiful tone, beautiful heart. And what he meant was, by listening to Francois and Gary play the bass, you aspire to be beautiful, and so you'll sound beautiful. Or vice versa.
Right. The challenges of getting little, smaller size basses, fractional basses, things below 8th size or below. How does that all work? What are some of the issues involved?
Well, you have to find people who are manufacturing them, and then you have to find the shops that sell that brand, right? And so, for example, in this area, there's a string shop that caters, exclusively to those Suzuki size, the fractional size string instruments. And so they carry like a 1/32 violin and a very tiny cellos. But basses, the closest shop that would even possibly deal in these sizes that, a 5-year-old, that's how old you are when you're in kindergarten, is Quantum Bass in Houston.
Not close. Yeah.
Not that close to, you would think in Texas it would be close, but Quantum is about 4 hours away. Mm-hmm. So they are able to deal with Moretti, and they've given our school district, a really great deal as far as, including the setup and helping us find the instruments that we need. And last year we had so many kindergarteners starting that we actually back-ordered the distributor for our basses. We're using Moretti basses right now. And I think our order was like 7 1/16 basses, and they only had 5 available. And Quantum did everything they could to get all of our instruments to us as quickly as they could. And in the meantime, another local shop helped me. I had never done this before, and, I had to do a little research and digging on how this was even done in the old days. But I made some bellows, which is what I affectionately term, basses that lived a past life as a cello, and they've been rescued. So we last year I made 3 bellows with the help of a shop in Arlington, Rasmussen, string shop helped me out, and it worked pretty well, but nothing beats a real bass. And these Morettis they've got beautiful sloped shoulders, and they're fully carved, and they come with a really nice wood bow, and Quantum is setting them up with adjustable bridges and Diodario strings, and it's just a very, very nice setup. And this is something that is so necessary, because if you think about how hard a 3/4 size bass is to play when it's not set up well, if you can fit your hand under the strings because the action is so high, imagine what like a tiny kindergarten paw would feel like trying to push down strings that are too high or play an instrument that's too big.
Yeah, it doesn't make you want to continue, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's not motivating, and it's not fun, and these are fun to play, and they sound beautiful. It's really impressive, actually. When
you do a lot of parent training, like pre-training, before the students start.
Yes.
And it's super cool that this is happening in the public schools.
Yes.
What do you set the parents up for in terms of what the year's going to be like?
I like to make sure that they understand that I respect the work that I'm asking them to do enough to show them what it is before we start with their kid. Mm-hmm. So that was very convoluted. What I mean is I like to take them through several meetings. The first one is just kind of an overview of our program and what the schedule is like and kind of what you should expect throughout the year. And then this is kind of something that came out of a district-wide effort to make our parent training a little stronger. But one of my coworkers, Oscar Soler, and I this year have been teaming up to do our beginning parent meetings. And so we did the overview meeting together as well as a philosophy meeting. And in the third meeting, all of our parents are watching Nurtured by Love, mm-hmm. which is a video about Dr. Suzuki and how a little bit more in depth about the philosophy. And after that, we also ask at my school, we're asking the parents to observe at least 2 lessons. And then once all those things are finished, we'll have the first meeting with the child and see what sound they like. Because there's nothing worse than practicing a sound you hate.
Yeah, right.
And then we'll do some more meetings with the parents, just one-on-one. And that's where Oscar and I kind of part ways, because by this point we've divided the parents into our studios. So I don't know what he does, but my parents read some excerpts of books that I think are really relevant to what they're doing, either ability development from age 0 or helping parents practice. Mm-hmm. And this year I'm also incorporating some readings from To Learn with Love. Then throughout, over the course of 2 to 4 lessons, they also do about 300 bow holds. Mm. And I have them teach another adult how to do a bow hold and bring me a picture of the adult's bow hold and then fix something. So they have kind of a little process of experiencing what it's like to teach, but I ask them to try to refrain from teaching their child how to do a bow hold until we do that together. And I take them through my names for the rhythms, and this whole time they're also listening to the recording as a family so that they're getting used to that routine as well. I think it's important for parents to hear the recording as well, so I try to encourage them to use something over a speaker instead of in headphones.
To get the acoustic, just the feel of the sound in the space and being able to listen to it together.
Yeah, and so that, if kids are listening to it on their iPads or whatever, then the parents don't really know what the songs are supposed to sound like, so they can't help them.
Are you the only one out here doing this? It seems like something, I know you're not, but also it's probably more uncommon than common still at this point. Like, what are some other places that have programs like this, either in the area or outside of the Dallas area?
Yeah, well, Michael Montgomery in Arkansas, he's in Fayetteville. He's got a mini bass program. And I mentioned Tracy Rowell, and when I was in Cleveland, I also met Nikki Castleberry, who was teaching at the Cleveland Music Settlement, and she had some little bass players there. Anna Doak is out in Seattle, and she's got a really healthy, beautiful bass studio up there. Her students have really beautiful tone, and there are some really beautiful studios in Kansas City. Johnny Hamill is doing some amazing work with his kids, and I could list a ton of people, but I feel like there are some hotbeds. And I know that there's a new program possibly starting in Philadelphia. They're just getting off the ground, so I don't know much about it yet, but I think things are developing and more things are happening. So the great thing is that, through book trainings, you can keep in touch with people that you've taken book one with. For example, one of my close friends actually took book one with me in Colorado, and now she teaches a couple towns over from where I teach, and I am going to go work with her bass students a few times this year. So it's all across the country, but it's important for places like ISB and the Suzuki conference, if people go, maybe to try to find each other and keep networking about this, because getting that support, even at George Vance workshops and Suzuki Institutes, sending your students to things like that, it really builds a sense of a larger community where it might feel like your Suzuki program in your town is by itself. And some teachers do studio exchanges where, for example, one teacher would go stay in another teacher's town, and they would kind of trade studios for a week and develop relationships that way in other instruments. So that would be something that would be great if the bass community would look at. I don't know who would organize that, but
right. Well, hopefully that'll continue to evolve.
Yeah.
I got to ask, and Kate and I were talking about this earlier, but talking about sizing and age, average age, because I found that totally fascinating. Like there are things smaller than 8 size. To a lot of people, an 8th size is a mystery zone. Like most of us think of quarter size. Anything smaller than that, it starts to become kind of a new thing for a lot of people. How old are people on the various sizes, kind of generally?
Well, of course, kids can be a variety of sizes.
Right.
And kindergartners there can be huge discrepancies in how tall a kid is or how big their fingers are. And when you're that young, your body grows in weird ways. Like your legs grow at one time and then your torso grows later. and your head's always really big. You kind of grow into that. But I would say that, generally speaking, a 5-year-old is probably going to be a 16th.
Okay.
I have not seen many kindergartners that would fit a 10th size bass. There are exceptions, and I know that shops that are providing 10ths are rare, and it's amazing that they're doing that, but it's not small enough for those younger kids. And, my youngest student at my home is 3, and when he's ready for a real bass, he's going to need a 32nd size bass.
And a 32nd size bass is strung up with strings tuned fourths, but an octave up.
Yes. Well, some basses, I've seen some 32nds with strings at pitch, and it doesn't, to me, the tone isn't quite there. So I prefer to use the octave up strings because it just sounds nicer to me. So I would say maybe like from 3 to 5 or 2 to 5, you could be on a 32nd. And then between 4 and 7, you could be on a 16th. But that overlaps because maybe by the time you're 6 or 7, you're big enough for a 10th. And I don't think I could even say that like gender has anything to do with it, because I've seen really tall boys and really tall girls in each age. But you stay on a 10th, in my opinion, for a long time because there are small 10ths and there are big 10ths. So this is also confusing. But maybe by the time you're in 5th or 6th grade, it's possible you'd be ready for that 8th size. Or by the time you're in 6th grade, which is about 12 years old, you could be ready for a quarter if you're a tall kid.
Right. Right.
I haven't ever had a half size 6th grader. I haven't had it yet.
Could happen, but it's rare.
And I am very conservative. And by that I mean I'm very careful about sizing too big because I don't want it to be hard.
And talk about that hand sizing at the neck block. How you look at what the right size is for a student. Well,
this is something that Jean Rebeck, who's another Suzuki bass teacher, kind of got me thinking about, because when I had students that were renting from him, and he's all the way up north in, I think, Michigan. Sorry, Jean, if it's not Michigan. But he had me trace the kid's hand and then mail it to him. And he was looking at the size of the kid's hand and their age to figure out how big the bass should be. And when I thought about how I felt playing my orchestra bass, which is a Prescott, and it's on the small side of Prescotts, but it's big, and I have pretty small hands for a bass player, I started to develop this theory about the neck block and how big that distance should be. And I'm still working on it, but I feel like the distance between your bass knuckles, which are the ones that poke out when you make a fist, at the edges of your hand, it should be that whole step on the neck block position. So whatever you call that 3rd position, 4th position, depending on what position system you're using, that should be about the same size as your hand, so you don't have to reach your fingers out, to me.
Yeah, well, it seems to work, because then you go down to 1st position and you can open up just a little bit but still get it comfortably.
Right.
Yeah.
And when Virginia describes how she sizes kids, she also said something that stuck with me for a long time. She said, I like to wait until the bass looks a little silly. It should look kind of like a toy, and then you can move up.
Moving up later is probably a better move than too soon.
It does some weird things sometimes to their bow arms because, as the bass gets taller and taller, because you're taller and taller, then your bow arm bends a little bit more to keep that right
placement.
Yes, bow placement. Thank you. But I guess I prefer that because we can always straighten out our arm much easier than we can heal a hand injury. Yeah. And what 5-year-old needs a hand injury anyway?
Right. Okay, I got to ask this is like non sequitur, but the best video ever made by Kate and Jesse McQuarters, who is a bass teacher in the Chicago area. I've known him for years. Works for WBZ, I think, WFMT, one of the radio stations there. And you climbed a mountain with your basses? Did that happen?
It happened.
Was I watching? I wasn't watching. You weren't pulling the wool over? What on earth inspired that? And what was that walk like?
Well, Mount Evans is a really fun place to go. It's like a touristy summit because it's a 14er, but you get to drive a big part of it if you want. And so last year, some of the faculty of Colorado Suzuki Institute went on a little excursion up Mount Evans on our day off. And Jesse and I were part of that excursion, and we kept joking around about, coming back, and we should bring our basses. We should have a little concert up here. We're all already here, and everybody else said that was silly, and Jesse and I just kept egging each other on all year. And then it came around to time for Colorado Suzuki Institute again, and we had both still been joking around about it. And so when you get to the mountain, there's still about, and I don't remember exactly, but it's a little climb left. And that early in the summer, there was still some snow. So we did have some weird, rock clambering to do.
With your bass.
Yeah, there was no trail. And that was a little bit nerve-wracking, but I would say that it was so worth it. And Jesse and I both just felt like it was so empowering, and we were discussing how, you just feel like you can do anything, because it was the most ridiculous idea, and we were just being so silly, and it came to fruition anyway. And I mean, how ridiculous. 2 bass players climbing a mountain, part of a mountain, with their basses and giving a concert. And those people at the end of the video, it looks like it's some big crew or something, but they all just kind of followed us up there. And the guy that ran the camera was a bass player too. He saw us and said, "Hi, I'm Bob. Do you need help?" And so I gave him, we gave him the camera, and that was that.
If someone's listening to this and they're interested in kind of going this path, you had this performance path through the DMA, had some experiences, and now you're doing this. People, wherever they are in school, whether they're in high school or they're in college at some point, or they're beyond that, and they're interested in diving into either the Suzuki world in general or teaching Suzuki strings in the schools, where do they go first? What are the first steps?
I would say see if there's a Suzuki teacher in your area that you could observe. And most Suzuki teachers would love to have somebody sit in on their lessons and watch how they interact with kids, and also how you interact with parents. But observing would be a good first step, just to see if, that's something you'd be interested in, and definitely reaching out to people are Suzuki teachers in your instrument. So if you're a bass player and you want to know more about being a Suzuki bass teacher, definitely ask myself or Virginia Dixon or Dan or, anybody that, there's plenty of Suzuki bass teachers on Facebook. We probably should get a Facebook group eventually, but that seems technological.
One step at a time.
One step at a time. But there's all kinds of things. You can go to the Suzuki conference.
Which is every other year?
Every other year. So that's happening actually this coming May. You could, on the off years, it's actually the on year for ISB. So there's probably at least a few Suzuki bass teachers there, and they'd probably love to answer questions. So yeah, reaching out to people who do this would be a great first step. Well, and there's definitely plenty of information in books and on the Suzuki Association's website. So that's also a great place to learn more if you like to read, about things and research.
What advice would you give 18-year-old Kate, like pre-med Kate, Illinois Wesleyan Kate? You got all these degrees in bass performance. You're teaching Suzuki. What would you tell that younger Kate?
Honestly, I wouldn't change anything.
Yeah.
So I would say just go with it because the journey's been amazing. I got to teach college. I got to do lots of gigs. I traveled a ton, and I studied with, I've been so fortunate to study with the people I've studied with. Jeff Braditich changed my life, and Max Dimhoff was such an inspiration, and Judy really nurtured me, and Virginia just encouraged every step I took, and Curtis Burris just nailed musicianship into my soul and gave me the confidence that I needed to be, the orchestral musician that I am. And and there's so many other people, like my colleagues. The bass world is such a sharing place that I can't think of anybody that's ever been anything but generous. I would truly just say, see where it takes you, because it's a great ride.
And you got a lot of good stories from Curtis.
Oh man. Yeah, he definitely is a character and encourages you to be your own character and your own self, and in a really weird way, I would say that Curtis is to adult students what Suzuki teachers hopefully are to children, where Curtis believed in you as a person and as a musician, and you became a better person and musician because you saw what he saw. He becomes this like mirror of confidence almost, and you can just absorb that from him. So that he changed my life too.
Well, and then you're changing all these young lives too, which is such a cool thing to have with these young people and working with them and their parents. And congratulations on this. It's a wonderful path you're on.
Thanks, Jason.
Is there anything else you want to get out there? Well, we got I'll link up to your website, and I'll link up to Suzuki. Anything we talked about?
I would say that this conference that's coming up in May, the Suzuki conference, is looking to be really special. Paul Ellison is going to come share his craft with us by teaching all of the masterclass students and possibly coaching the bass choir, and some of the preliminary brainstorming that I've done with people who are interested in presenting bass sessions just already sounds so phenomenal, and I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag with any of that, but it's looking amazing. And the theme of the conference this year is collaborating and mentoring, and I just feel like this would be a really great year if anybody's ever been interested but hasn't gone to the Suzuki conference, that this would be a great time, because it's going to be so much sharing, and it seems like the environment is perfect for this right now, So I think that's going to be really exciting.
Kate, you rock. Thank you so much for bringing me down, working with your students. So great to run into you in Ithaca and chat with Curtis. Thank you for connecting me with Curtis. So great to hang out and get to know you and chat with you about Suzuki bass and what you're up to in the bass world. And definitely, folks, check out those links that Kate talked about. I've got those in the show notes. And if you're interested in this, what an inspiring way to get involved. There's so much power and beauty in setting up your own studio wherever you may live and bringing people in and showing them the magic of this instrument and this exciting time that we're living in with the bass in so many ways, from the boundaries that we're pushing in the solo end of things at the Bradage competition to how we're ushering in this new generation of young players with what Kate's doing. So exciting. I walked out of there super inspired and so excited to share Kate's story. So I hope you enjoyed this. I really appreciate you listening. I'm sure Kate appreciates it too. And if you're new, subscribe to the podcast. What the heck is subscribing to a podcast? You may ask. Go to contrabassconversations.com. There is a link that says subscribe. That's contrabassconversations.com/subscribe. We'll take you there. And you can subscribe using whatever device you walk around, smartphone with. You can subscribe on Kindle. Did you know you can do that? You can do that. You can subscribe on your Apple TV if you want to. I don't know if anybody does that, but you could do that too. You could subscribe via email. I'll send you an email and let you know about new shows. However you want to do it, that's the best way to follow along with these, because then you don't have to go trying to check. I will just send you the episode or a notification about the episode when it comes out. And did you know we have an app? contrabassconversations.com/app. That app is for iOS, it's for Android, it's for Kindle. We have thousands of iOS installations alone. I was looking the other day. I think we got 4,000 people with the iOS app installed. That's a lot of people. You could turn on notifications for that too, so you can get my 2 a.m. notification when the episode comes out. And thanks for listening, however you found this. Tell lots of friends. I would really appreciate that. And we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.